Hi, I'm Jan Ozer. I'm speaking today with Jacob Arends, who's a product manager of Playback at Bitmovin, and David Steinacher, an engineer on the Playback team at Bitmovin. And we're here to discuss server-guided ad insertion. Now, we all know server-side ad insertion and client-side ad insertion. We know the pros and cons of that, but server-guided ad insertion has come into the scene recently, and I wanted to discuss its pros and cons and when it will become applicable both for Bitmovin customers and people who want to use it in general. So Jacob and David, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So Jacob, why don't you give us a quick background on client-side and server-side ad insertion?
So client-side ad insertion is something which, as you mentioned, has been used in the industry for a long time now. The basic principle is that the player itself, or the client side, owns all the logic around making the ad request and communicate with the ad server, pulling down the ad, and then typically either replacing the main content or having like a two-player approach and switching to the main content. So it's highly dynamic, it's highly personalizable. You're kind of using information you know about the client to in real time make ad decisions, when to pull it down, and kind of all that scheduling information is going on the client side. On the other side, then the industry adopted server-side ad insertion.
Just to finish up on client side, what are the negatives?
Good idea. So because the client is making all of the decisions and making those requests via VAS tags to the server, to the ad server, the main drawback of client-side ad insertion is ad blockers. So because the client's making that request, it means that ad blockers can intercept that, can block it, and ultimately that means no ad is then served to the customer, and ultimately folks are losing out on ad revenue.
What about playback smoothness between you've got your ad and your content coming from different locations, and the server's kind of got to pull those two together? How does that work on not only computers that typically have the horsepower to handle it, but maybe mobile devices that have less power and TVs that even have less?
David, do you want to touch on that?
Definitely a valid point. So especially on TVs and those low-end devices, the switch is noticeable. So replacing the main content with the ad content takes time, depending on the device, more or less. And definitely one big disadvantage of client-side ad insertion, yes.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So obviously to then counteract that, say the jump to server-side ad insertion, where what's happening is that instead of giving that decision-making and integration to the client, it's all happening on the back end. So as the content is being encoded, the back end is basically communicating with the ad server and pulling in ad content to actually stitch into the main content. And the main benefit here is obviously that because it's part of the main content, there is no need to transition to either another player instance or another source. It's all baked into the main content. Now, there can still be issues if, like, the ad content, for example, has different properties to the main content, but typically it's a lot better than with client-side ad insertion for transition times. The other thing is that obviously this then gets or mitigates the whole ad block problem. You can't block an ad if it's already stitched into the main content. There are still calls made by the client, so things like client-side beaconing to let the backend know that the ad has indeed been played, but typically you can't stop the user from viewing it. Obviously, then go on. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Obviously, then though the issues come that because you're then having to stitch the content on the encoding side, it means that there is, let's say, one ad in each ad opportunity per stream, which means that you lose this kind of personalization down to the user. Now, you could obviously enable more personalization by just enabling more encodes, but again, by increasing the personalization, you increase the scale of your backend, and that can be quite expensive to kind of have one stream per user to have the ultimate personalization. So that is one drawback of server-side ad insertion.
What about the type of ads you can run with server-side as compared to client-side?
David?
Usually just video, so no interactive formats or no companion ads, for example. On client-side ad insertion, when we stick to the VAST standard, there are a lot of interactive formats in there as well, like even VPaid at some point, which fully needs to happen at a site in a sidecar implementation if you want to have that on server-side ad insertion.
Okay, so we're seeing both client-side and server-side have their pros and cons. Let's take a look at server-guided at this point.
Yeah, sure. So we're going to look at a very crude diagram I've made, which basically highlights, let's say, the differences. And what is really happening here is it's a kind of combination of both. So you've still got the main content coming from the backend, from CDN, but what's happened is that the server has inserted SGAI markers. So basically the server is still making the decision on when the ad happens. But what's happening is that through specs like HLS interstitials, you're then giving the client the opportunity or the responsibility to then interact with the ad server and go and get the ad content. So it's kind of a mix of both. The scheduling is happening on the server whilst the actual retrieval of the ad is happening on the client, which again means that you reintroduce this idea of personalization. Because you're kind of last minute going and making that ad request, and so what that content you get back can again be very personal to the end user.
Okay. I mean, it seems like you're back at a lot of the negatives of client side, though. You've got ad blocking, and you've got the fact that you've got your content and your ad coming from different locations, so that the player has to stitch them together. What is, again, how does that work both for powerful devices like a computer and also and I guess computers are where you have ad blockers more than smart TVs, but how does the smoothness work on smart TVs, for server guided as compared to server and client side?
When we stick to smart TVs, then we will have to see. It could be that the benefit will be small or even not existing, but there are talks in the industry to improve the whole single decoder behavior and single decoder issues on those smart TVs. But as mentioned, we will have to see how that ends up in production.
Okay, so we still have the same issues on smart TVs. I guess there's nothing architecturally about server guided that will solve the stitching problem, the smoothness issues that you talked about. What about the ad blocker on computers? I think that's probably where it's more pronounced.
For ad blockers, similar answer we will also have to see, but the big advantage is that the content is coming from a different format. When we stick to HLS interstitial, which is the standard which is out there at the moment, they will be served as playlist. So existing ad blockers don't know those formats yet. Of course, if they are served through a well-known ad domain, then they might be already blocked as of today. But we will have to see. We would assume that ads, those interstitials, are then also served through the same domain or CDN as the main content, and ad blockers might not block that yet. Of course, also technically speaking, there might be still the possibility to detect this, but also we will have to see if ad blockers can distinguish between ads or bumpers or interstitials, because the spec itself doesn't really say, okay, this is now always an ad.
Kind of a dumb question. I've never played with ad blockers, but if I block an ad on a live stream, I mean, what happens? I can't jump ahead because it's live. Do I just see a black screen for 60 seconds?
depends on what's the content, what's the actual content in those streams. It could be a black screen. It could actually be a different ad, which is not meant for you, or just a filler content.
Okay.
The other thing is that what's kind of being talked about a lot, which with server guided ad insertion and what it's enabling is looking at these kind of concurrent ad formats. So I had it up in the diagram a second ago. The L bar, the picture-in-picture, side-by-side ads, which means that you're keeping that consistent viewer experience. So you're not taking people away from the content, but rather bringing the ad to them, which means that things like discontinuities or the switching between the ad content and the main content doesn't really become an issue if you're kind of just presenting it to them as an overlay. It's not to say that you have to use server guided ad insertion to have overlay ads. Companion ads and stuff have kind of fielded this before, but I think it allows more of an opportunity to have personalized content in this way. And also, as David mentioned, so the ad content might not be coming through, might be coming from a well-known source, it might not be. Also, I think there's more opportunity to kind of create proxies, etc., or kind of mitigate that well-known domain or ad blocker lists, etc., for server guided ad insertion. And on top of both of those things, the content which you show as a concurrent ad, for example, or as concurrent content might not even be ads at all. And that's actually kind of where the HLS interstitials kind of comes in, is that this could actually be, highlights, for example, if you're watching live content, as you say, Jan, highlights from a different game or something that's going on concurrently, or maybe it's a promotion for internal, content. So rather than an external ad, more something you're promoting for your own streaming service. So there's it comes both ways, and it might not actually be ad content which you're serving through that.
How much of that can I do with client side?
Yes. No, I think the current standards which are used, for example, VAST, can definitely be used for exactly that use case, but I have never seen that in production. Of course, when we talk about a fully custom implementation, not forced into any standard, then it's again still possible as of today, but it definitely requires a secondary communication channel to the client in order to tell the client, okay, please play, I don't know, this highlight from this game now. While in server guided ad insertion, as the name suggests, the server always ships this information as part of the main content, as part of the stream.
Okay, so the vision of server guided is it's going to enable much more interactive and rich ad or joint viewing experience or co-viewing experience. Where is it in terms of actual production? Is this something I can actually use today? Or I'm sure the player that you guys have supports it, but what about the whole ecosystem of ads these days?
Yeah, so we have samples and kind of looking to take a few customers live with it in the first half of 2025. But the ecosystem's still early. There's only very few adopters at the moment actually live in production. There's still some of the big players who are there with implementations, but aren't again fully fleshed out. So I think a lot of the things we talked about will flesh themselves out in the market. Even things like standardization on how you use HLS interstitials for server guided insertion isn't quite there. It's something which the SVTA group are trying to formalize and standardize. We don't want to fall into a same situation as with SSAI, where there's kind of no standard way of doing it, and it means that we have unique integrations for every ad vendor there. Whether that's even just down to we talk about the concurrent ads, even if it's just down to a way to standardize how to send that something is a picture-in-picture content, for example, and how that should be displayed, or how to interact with an ad server, what information do you put into the interstitial content or into the interstitial itself. So yeah, there's a lot of open questions, and I think everyone's going in with their eyes open seemingly, but definitely we'll work those out, I reckon, over the next year or so.
So what's your sense? I mean, what's the among your customers that you're familiar with, what percentage are using client side versus server side at this point, and how do you see that shaking out towards server guided over the next even 2 to 3 years?
We saw a lot of our customers use server-side ad insertion. I think just again from the ad blocking point of view and also a predictability and scheduling point of view, I think server guided offers a really nice opportunity to customers to kind of keep a lot of that scheduling, keep a lot of that control on the back end, while again also introducing the personalization. I think particularly in sports, we see a really big push back towards personalization and what additional experiences you can give to your customers. I mentioned, not even necessarily just using it for ad content, but also for, complementary content, whether that's image overlays or, something that's kind of auxiliary to the main content. So I think there's a lot of interest in it, a lot of questions coming up about it. So we're there and ready for when they are, but I think the real use cases will start coming in this year, and I think that's when we'll start picking up some traction, maybe.
Okay, and the negatives are going to be the potential for ad blocking and the potential for discontinuity between the streams coming in from different locations. So we get a lot more ad types, we get a lot more creativity, we get server control, and then the potential risks that, as David said, may be able to overcome are we get back to the client side ad blocking and potential for discontinuity between the streams. Is that kind of a good summary, or?
I think so. Yeah, I think the other one for me is, as you say, is the I'm hoping that it doesn't become a negative, but is the lack of standardization across how we actually, provide, from a protocol point of view, talk between the back end that's actually creating the interstitials, and I'm using HS interstitials. There's the Dash standard which is coming out and stuff. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how that all comes together over the next year.
David, I made the assumption that ad blocking was mostly done on computers. Is that in fact the truth? I mean, are there ad blockers that work on smart TVs as well, or are they not as prevalent?
Good question. For smart TVs, to be honest, I'm not that familiar. I would assume it's harder, but possible? Question mark. I cannot dare in guarantee.
Okay. I mean, I know that everybody wants more personalization, and I think that's why we advertise on connected TVs. So if server guided gives you the ability to deliver that, I think it's going to, once all the wrinkles are ironed out and once the standards are in place, I think you'll see a pretty significant adoption, even if there are some potential downsides as we talked. So listen, I really appreciate you guys joining me for this. I had a lot of questions in it. I appreciate the honest and open look at where it is today and what it can do for advertisers out there.
Brilliant. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for waiting.